Hi everyone, I'm here with Robby Young, CEO of Animoca Brands. Robby, it's great to have you today
Thank you.
to have a fireside chat and delve into some interesting topics. First of all, I'd love to just hear a little background, just for those of us, or those of the people that may not know your background and history with Animoca.
Sure.
I'd love to hear a little bit.
No problem. So I've been with the company now for about 10 years. Yat, who's our chairman and co-founder, and I have been friends for an awfully long time. Let's just say since we had our first Web 1.0 startups in the 90s. I joined at the time when we were primarily a mobile games studio focused on free-to-play casual games. And it was just the beginning days of the App Store on iOS and the emergence of Android. And then I've been with the business sort of shepherding it through becoming a public company, and then eventually the transition to kind of exclusively focusing on the intersection of blockchain and gaming since the end of 2017, beginning of 2018.
Yes, you mentioned obviously you've been with the company for a long time now, and the landscape, in Web3 and digital asset ownership, blockchain gaming is changed significantly, since then in that time. And I'm wondering, from your perspective, what do you see as the most fundamental, I guess, shifts and changes that have kind of affected you and Animoca?
Sure. I mean, I think from our perspective, obviously blockchain changes everything, which is why we're really big proponents of the whole sort of Web3 Metaverse movement, because when we think about being game developers and game designers, our sort of traditional DNA has always been about building game environments that have in-game economies and offer users the ability to spend money to enhance their experiences and compete against each other and socialize and have fun. But it has always traditionally been a one-way street, because users spend their money in exchange for entertainment, but entertainment is the end result, and they get monetized, those users, as advertisers or as advertising, fodder or whatever else you want to call it. But they're participants in a one-way ecosystem, and blockchain changes that now, because now that we have the ability to underpin those very same types of games with an actual economy where we can give digital ownership to those players of the items in the games that they purchase, we have the ability now to really create a genuine ecosystem where players can, build value inside a game, and retain that value. And I think there's been a lot of focus and a lot of attention given over the last year to people who are actually, making money doing these things, and making profit on investing their money into NFTs and other in-game assets. And I'd actually like to propose something far more boring and simple, which is, I think the thesis here is just that we're no longer in kind of a zero-sum system where everybody loses everything spending on games. So if you can go to a world where people at least retain something, we then have an environment that's much more like the one, that I grew up playing games in, where you had cartridges in consoles, and when you got tired of playing a game, you could sell it on the second-hand market and get something back for that game, and you take your money and invest it in a new game. And there's no reason that, we can't now do that with blockchain, because NFTs enable us to do that in a purely digitally distributed game environment. Sorry, that was a really long answer.
No, it was great. And I think, you touched on some very important points there. With hindsight, it's really simple, right? But I think a lot of people maybe, took a while to actually grasp that. Even when you're talking about traditional gaming companies, we still haven't seen a huge leap into the space from them.
It's very difficult though, because it upends a model that they've honed over years of development, because the business model ultimately, the last person who votes for democracy is the king. right? Because it just doesn't, it's not favorable to the business model. And when you have an incredible business that ticks over like a well-oiled machine, the idea of risking that to go and try something completely new, I mean, any sensible business person is not going to do that. So they're stuck with that innovator's dilemma, like all incumbents. And I think that's why we found ourselves in a position as a kind of a medium-sized, indie developer, somebody who was able to make that pivot without, and be more, aggressive about it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's an interesting point. I think, yeah, it's very valid. I think, makes a lot of sense. So with regards to NFTs, and I guess particularly in game and in metaverse NFTs, what do you see as, I guess, the next evolution or the next step for where they're going?
Sure. I think this year one of the things that we've seen is we've seen demonstrated the idea that people can own their stuff in a game, and that sort of basic concept of digitally owning an in-game playable item as an NFT has been well established now across different blockchains, different games, different use cases, etc. So I think that's here to stay. I think the innovation that's sort of at the fringes now that I'm seeing are new techniques of, because the thing that's wonderful about this is you give your users and your players a tool, and the first thing they're going to do is try to push it to its limits to see exactly how far they can take that tool. And I think we see the same thing in games. So now users want more. We've given them ownership. Now they want the ability to own it and customize it and modify it. And how do they, so how do you take your NFT and then reskin it, and then do you remint it as something else, or do you wrap it as another token, or how do I bring it over and bridge it to this chain? Or there's all these other things that users say, I want to do this, I want to do that. And so it's up to us as game developers to think how we can problem solve and open up that universe of interoperability for users. And that's quite exciting, because I think people just, they love it, they want more.
Yeah, that's definitely a concept that I've found interesting and pondering upon recently is the objects that you have in game, or the NFTs that you have in game, and taking them through different metaverses, and how that might evolve in terms of reskinning or customizing or changing as they go from one metaverse to another. And this kind of like concept I thought of kind of meta tripping, of your tripping through metaverses, like what do these objects do, this kind of potential there, and perhaps the value changes, perhaps it's really interesting, I think, where it's going to go in the next sort of year or two.
Yeah. I mean, one of the examples that we've grappled with recently, kind of experimenting, is thinking about, we have a metaverse game called the Sandbox, and it's done in a pixelated 8-bit art style. And what we wanted to do was we wanted to take advantage of great user communities around PFP projects. So, we were kind of ideating around what would a Bored Ape look like in the Sandbox, because the thing is that a Bored Ape is fundamentally a 2D illustration. And how do you then translate that 2D illustration into a 3D pixelated art style in a way that's faithful to the original artwork, but at the same time gives you that feeling that that's your ape brought to life, in a new environment? And those, and that's actually more art than science.
Yeah, I think that actually is a kind of leading a little bit into. We'll come back to the stuff about, I guess, data, but I think identity is become more of a digital sort of entity. You have this digital identity, ownership and identity, and it's become, I think that as well as obviously the pandemic and us all being locked in our houses, but that's become another driver for the ecosystem. And I guess, like, how important do you think, I guess, identity within metaverses is, and how we how does that reflect in games and in
Sure.
metaverses? And
well, I
what do you
think
think?
the key part to that is going to be the interoperability piece, because I think identity is really important. And when I say identity, I think of that as a social construct rather than
Yeah,
a secure ID kind of crypto
yeah.
idea
Yeah,
concept.
that's
Um,
yeah, exactly.
and so identity is in, look, I have, I have this avatar, and it may or may not look like me, or it may be it may be a purple gorilla, who knows, it's my avatar, and I want to customize it because that's my, that's how people view me and perceive me in this particular metaverse. And I may want that persistent across a variety of metaverses and my social media and everything, because that's my online persona. Or I may want to play different roles in different communities, because maybe this sort of MMORPG battleground where I'm fighting with orcs and everybody else is a community where I want to be one kind of person, but yet when I'm on social media, I want to be somebody else. So I think that part is very important, at how to manage those IDs as, what do you call it, as NFTs in your wallet, perhaps cycling through those and figuring out how to connect those with real world personas. I think definitely, and there are a number of companies who are specifically working just on this idea of avatars and cross-platform avatar creation.
Yeah, and kind of digital identity and reputation and all of that kind of being tied into. Yeah, I think
Yes.
it's a very interesting and evolving space, and how we see that kind of, I guess, evolving is going to be it's going to be pretty interesting over the next couple of years. But I guess, like, as these ecosystems and metaverse ecosystems sort of mature, how do you see data playing a part of the metaverse? Like, what, since this is a DeData conference, like what do you see the role of data in metaverses?
So I think the really interesting thing is that once you start to have metaverses that are on chain, and at least the ownership of items are on chain, then you can start to think about what it means to have a memory, because things are permanent, and not just the ownership of things, but you can also start to put data on chain that has to do with social interaction, for example. So when you look at the idea of games being completely on chain, that's something that I think a lot of game developers who've really embraced blockchain think quite strongly about. And when you think of a game on chain, then you essentially have a recording of the entire history of a game, which means that you can rewind and replay parts of the game and reenact them because it's on chain, and your game engine becomes a player for that on-chain data. And that's kind of interesting, because we have a lot of, I mean, there are plenty of big businesses, that evolve around sort of the Twitch universe of being able to witness and memorialize gameplay moments, because gameplay is such a big part of how we entertain and socialize ourselves. And so to think about all of that memory and history being on chain, there are so many other businesses that can then be built on top of the availability of that data. That's quite interesting.
Yeah, I think the other thing about that is we also even now are seeing kind of NFT historians and blockchain gaming historians who, I mean, they're
Yes.
not going back that many years, but they're, because the data was on chain, they've become archaeologists for things that sort of tried and failed, and then they've dug them up again. Like, I think we saw that with Mooncat,
Yeah. Well, and I think one of the best examples I can think of that actually is Moneyball, if you've read the book or seen the movie, because it's this idea that you can play a game, in that case baseball, and it's fun, and every game can be different. But if you actually analyze all the data of every game that's ever been played, you might play the game totally differently, based purely upon data as opposed to physics and emotion and everything else that goes into gameplay.
Yeah, there's a lot more we could go into, and I think I could talk to you forever about this, because it's such an interesting topic, and I think a growing one. So it's been a pleasure to talk to you, Robby, and I hope we get to do one of these again soon, because I've got lots more questions I'd love to ask you. But yeah, I think it's around about our time. So yeah, lovely to chat with you, and yeah.
Fantastic. No, I really appreciate it, Sia. Thank you. It's been great to chat.
Thank you. Thank you.